Welcome to our last session of active learning for almost of teaching. Today, we want to talk a little bit about assessment tools and how do you foster the metacognitive process using these kind of assessments to engage your students. And in the digital active learning series workshop, we have already talked about basic active learning strategies for different modes of teaching. And then we talk about the tools and strategy to engage students with the class discussion and interaction. And like I just mentioned today, we want to focus on assessment. All right, so today's agenda, we're gonna talk a little bit about assessment and the tools, and then we'll have our faculty discussions. We're gonna have some questions. They're gonna share with us how they're going to deliver their assessments and activities using different kinds of tools. And after that session, we will have a breakout, so you will get the opportunity to meet with individual panel speakers about specific questions. Okay, so I want to, before I start today's session, I want to kind of talk about two different kinds of assessment as a review. As you can see, there are two circles. One is called formative assessment. One is called summative assessment. And normally the formative assessment, we'll call it mini assignments. So you give them these kind of low point value to kind of help them to do self-practice and check in their learning. And the summative assessment usually has high point value, more like a final exam, final project, and that kind of thing. And how do you tell the difference between the two is that formative usually offered before or during the instruction or during the semester or during the term. And usually it's for students to learn and improve their skills. Vice versa, the summative assessment usually delivered at the end of the term, and the purpose is to evaluate their learning. And usually it's kind of hard to remember the two, so I have an analogy for you here. If you see a chef is trying to taste the soup to decide whether I need to put more salt or more spice or more water, and that's something we call a formative assessment. But if the customer start to taste the soup and give you a feedback whether this is a good soup or not, this is summative. So that's the way how I remember. This is during the cooking time, and this is after the meal is made. So very quickly, I want to ask everybody a question. Every time when we think about assessment, you always think about exam. And I want to challenge faculty to think about, is the exam the best way to deliver or evaluate your students' learning for your class? If your answer is no, then you may want to consider some of the alternative assessment to replace the exam to make it more interactive and more precisely help you to evaluate students' learning. So for example, you can do something like creative writing assignments or some sort of multimedia technology or to make an alternative assignment for exams. Other idea like open book take-home exam, quick sheets, collaborative testing, student portfolio, and all that. So really think about whether exam is the best way to evaluate students' learning before you start creating exam to create exam. And if you think about this question and you feel like, you know what, I really think exam is important for this class, then you need to really start to think about, you know, the purpose of the exam and how you're going to, you want to help the student to monitor their learning progress. So I want to give this exam, or you want the exam to help you to evaluate students' outcome. So these are good questions to think about before we even talk about assessment. So I have a document created here. If you click on this link, we're gonna put the link in the chat as well. So I have a document created that is to really take just 1 minute to think about this. There are two columns here. The first column is formative assessment. Remember, they are mini assignments. They are more for students to do self-practice or checking their progress. Usually it's offered during the term. And it's really help you to engage student with the learning interaction. And summative assessment is more those big project, big exam, and it's help you to evaluate students' learning and the offer at the end. So let's think about what type of assessment you're gonna give it to your student as a formative, and what kind of assessment you want to give as a summative, and what kind of technologies are you thinking about using it. And obviously, you are gonna have some concerns or challenges every time when we design these things. So feel free to put that challenges, concerns there. So let's take a few seconds, let everybody to put your thoughts in here so we can kind of get our mind exercise before we welcome our panel session here. So let me kind of review what of the information we already put it in. We have faculty talk about, for formative, you can do discussion board about reading. That is so nice. And sometimes the perusal could be another good tool for you to help students facilitate their reading, because they do group annotations, which a lot of faculty really liked it. How about reflective activities that can be done either in the classroom or online? That's a really good idea. Scavenger hunt, short paper. Short paper is always nice because you can just ask them to use that paper to do some reflective kind of exercise. And once they turn it in, you can just give them a point. So that also help you to manage your time and avoid burnout. That kind of thing. So technology use iClicker, Canvas discussion board, perusal, Canvas quiz video, share whiteboard. So I also want to remind faculty, right now UCI has a new tool called Poll Everywhere. And we talked about it in our last session. Poll Everywhere could be a nice replacement for iClicker because student does not have to pay for the device. So that's something you may want to consider. And if you're interested to learn more about Poll Everywhere, feel free to either watch our recording or schedule a DTEI office hour for consultation. So let's talk about the challenges. Students haven't used perusal. That is a very, very good concern, because we always assume students are younger generation, they should already know technology without learning curve, and that's not always the case. So every time when you implement a new technology, it is important that you onboard them with, how to use it. Some faculty will create a practice assignment for them to practice before the real assignment kicked in. And DTEI also create a faculty getting started guide, as well as student getting started guide. And I'm gonna share with you the link later that you could just download those documents and modify and share it with your students so you can help your student get ready to use the technology. We also have faculty start to talk about a summative assessment. So research paper, oral presentation exams are very, very common, and they are great assessment ideas to deliver for to evaluate students' learning. Library tools for research is very, very important. I think we all need to prepare faculty, to prepare students to really learn about how to find academic resources. And then, proctoring tools, right now, UCI recommend faculty to use Zoom for the group proctoring. If you have any question about how to do that, or you're not sure if that's the right tool for you, I highly recommend you to contact the academic testing center. They will help you not only get you on board with setting out your Zoom proctoring, they can also offer you additional proctor to help you proctor your students if you teach a large class. So feel free to contact them. So projects are challenging to grade for large classes because grading consistency. That is very true. So sometimes you may want to consider peer feedback as part of the evaluation, or you want to have a very clear rubric. So in that way, the grading consistency could be fulfilled. Working on your own TA time, yes, working on your own. So, okay, so feel free to continue, fill in these documents. And something I'd like to share with faculty, that these kind of activity is really effective to engage your learner learners in a remote setting. So if you plan to do any sort of Zoom lecturing in the future, this may be a good opportunity for you to get your student to interact before you start your lectures. So they already have their mindset in the right place with you. So I want to share with resources with you. I don't necessarily have a lot of time to talk details. Many faculty always ask, well, I'm teaching remote or I'm teaching hybrid. I don't know how much is enough. Or do I give student enough exercise, or do I give them too much work to do? I have no idea what to do, because usually when I teach face-to-face, I do, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I give them midterm and final, and that's it. So now if I don't meet with them Monday, Wednesday, Friday, what do I do? And luckily, there is a thing called equivalent instructional activities. And what it does is like this. So click on this link. It will give you some possible activities you can offer to your student. You most likely are online. And there's a description about what kind of activity will be like. And they give you a suggested time that student may need to spend for these activities. So you can kind of get a feel of it. Let's say if you do hybrid, right? And the student only meet you 2 hours a week instead of 3. So you want to give equivalent enough activity to fill out that 1 hour instruction that they didn't come to class. And this gets really handy. You can kind of do that. Obviously, this is just a recommendation. Don't see this as a guideline. This is not a guideline at all. This is just something that gives us a good idea about how to evaluate, how much time will cost for students to do each other activity. And I have 2 examples from 2 different universities, so you can see that. Okay, hopefully that is helpful for you. Finally, I also want to suggest faculty you think about mastery learning grading system, because fall quarter is going to be a challenging quarter. We may have most of the student on campus, and we have some student remote or hybrid. It just gets a little messy here because we don't know what happened. And maybe some student join us at the beginning on campus and suddenly have a life emergency, then the student had to learn online. So ended up, if you design your course with mastery learning grading system, they may give student option to earn the points versus and also help you to grade your student more flexibly. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to talk about this because it could be a 1 week long of talk. I have a link right here called Mastery Learning as Perfections Grading. If you click on this link right here, you will be able to see different faculty sharing their teaching experience using the Mastery Perfections Grading structure. So we have UCI Professor Renee link. Will is from Georgia Tech, Kate from Emory, and Robert from Grand Valley State. We have all different faculties talk about how they design their grading system using this perfections grading to enhance learning, and that gives student opportunity to earn points and excel their learning. And that also allows students to feel more ownership of their learning. So if you're interested to do that, feel free to click on this link and watch those videos. If you are curious about, how do I get my student on board with different technologies like Perusal or these Poll Everywhere? They're so new. You can click on this link right here. DTEI has put together 8 different things. So from Canvas to Poll Everywhere to UJAC Quiz, Perusal, Zoom, Gradescope, Turnitin. If you click on any of these tools, you will get a little blurb about what the tool is, how that can enhance your teaching. But at the same time, at the bottom, there's always a workshop that we talk about how to get started with that tool for faculty. And the bottom here, there's always a getting started guide. So there's a faculty guide. You can download it for yourself to get started. And then if you want to onboard your students, no problem. We already built a student guide for you. So all you have to do is include the student guide. Let's say this is Perusal. You're going to use Perusal. Just just put the student guide in your Canvas site, or you can modify that, put in your syllabus. So there's a lot of information, like this one on the right hand side are all additional resources you can get from. So this is a great thing if you want to learn about these tools more from the pedagogical perspective instead of technical training. This is a good site you may want to consider to click on. So those are the resources, and this is a really quick overview of today's session. So now it's my honor to introduce our wonderful faculty panel speakers today. We have QV from engineering, Nancy from biological sciences, and we have Bridget from statistics. And they're gonna share with us how they manage assessment in their teaching, and Bo, as our instructional designer, will serve as the moderator. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Bo, you could just go ahead to unmute your microphone and start your sharing. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Probably loaded with a lot of good ideas. I see a lot of you, your eyes are sparkle. And today, I'm so glad to have these three awesome faculty have experienced their teaching in using a different strategy, using a different technology. So I would like to welcome again Bridget, QV, and Nancy here. As usual on our panel discussion, I have pre-sent some of the question, and then also we'll be discussing about some of the tools here. Right now, what I would like is I would like to actually ask each of our panel to first introduce yourself, who you are, and then also share which assessment tool that you use in your course to do the assessing student outcome, and briefly share why did you decide to do so. So now I'm going to ask first Bridget, and then Nancy, then QV.
All right. Hi. Can you hear me just fine?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm Bridget Barty. I am a lecturer in the Department of Statistics in ICS. And I like to try a whole bunch of things, and I've been teaching for a while, so it has varied. But currently I'm using, in terms of assessments, the clicker. I didn't use them when we were forced remote. I am going to go back both in remote and in person using that. Canvas quizzes, Gradescope quizzes, and obviously also in-person exams when we have them. So in person, I like using the clicker system because I have students work on problems and then they can just select an answer. So that's a way for them to see if they got the answers right, and then for me to see also if they got it right, or more importantly, actually see if they got it wrong. Students often are much more alert when a lot of students get a question wrong because they do not expect that, and that makes them pay a lot more attention. That makes class a lot more lively. So during class, I like that. It's much better than the old-fashioned just you ask a question and maybe one or two people answer. I should say that I have classes that are somewhat large in the 200 size. Even before pandemic, I had a hybrid flipped format, so I've had videos for a while, and you have to have something to make students watch them in time. So having some quiz associated with that is important. It also helps them reinforce. So, active retrieval of memory is important for reinforcement of learning. So I typically use the Canvas quizzes for that because they're very useful, and I'll talk about that later. And then for other exams or in between assessments, even review assessments, I've been using Gradescope in part because Gradescope is so much easier for grading. And so maybe we'll go about that later.
Thanks, Bridget. Well, I love the fact that you are doing a lot of check-in questions here and there, and you said actively retrieving and reinforcing their learning while they're watching the concept, and that's really great. And that is the greatest, the topic that fits in, fostering that metacognition process for students as they're watching, and that also Megan shared about the format assessment. Thank you so much, Bridget, and we'll love to dig into some of the tools that you did mention during this time. All right, Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I'm an associate professor of teaching in ecology and evolutionary biology. I teach class sizes ranging from 60 to 400, and they range from lower division courses up to an upper division lab, which is also a writing class. Assessment for engaging students during lectures, whether it's online or in person. I've used Poll Everywhere. When we're in person, I use iClickers. I've also used the polls within Zoom. I have found that those are just really easy to set up. For my freshman biology class, we use Pearson textbooks, and it's bundled with a tool called Learning Catalytics, which is an interactive thing like Poll Everywhere, but it's specific to STEM classes. So if you do anything like with math, graphs, I've really enjoyed Learning Catalytics. Canvas quizzes, I have used them for everything from practice quizzes. I'll have like reading quizzes available all week that students can use to keep taking over and over again. Quizzes about videos. I've also used quizzes as summative assessment. So during the pandemic, I got rid of midterms and finals and replaced them with weekly progress checks. So these were short. They didn't have a lot of time in terms of minutes to finish them. So if they hadn't done their studying, they couldn't just sit there and look up answers. And a lot of students felt that that was a fair way to use the quizzes for an assessment. I love Perusall. So we do a lot of journal article readings on Perusall. For videos, I've explored a little bit using videos in Perusall. So this year I might play with having some of my pre-lecture videos in Perusall so that students can annotate the videos. For my lab class, it's a writing class. We do peer review. I do that within Canvas. And then of course, like homework assignments where students have to write short paragraphs, and to make it easier to grade, I do a lot of that in Gradescope because I have 12 sections and a whole herd of TAs, and Gradescope has been good for trying to coordinate across TAs.
Thanks, Nancy. I realized that both Bridget and Nancy, you have a pretty big classes. So I could tell that someone trying a technology to really help students to engage and to really check their learning. And I love hearing so many different technologies. So that's great to hear that. Well, thank you so much for sharing. QV?
Hi, everyone. I'm QV, and I was so excited I created a presentation. So here, we're going to do a little presentation. And thanks to Simu Liu for being included in here. All right, so I am an assistant professor of teaching in the electrical engineering and computer science department at the School of Engineering. My courses that I typically teach are core lower division courses where enrollment is anywhere between 120 to 300 students. And I like to think of my primary skill as tricking students into learning. So here's a picture of me. And I tricked all this, well, I didn't trick them. I offered them extra credit to show up in orange on Halloween, pre-pandemic, of course. And they all showed up. And then it wasn't just that, there were little exercises we did leading up to it that kind of made them actually have to work together, figure it out. So I gave them, just as an example here for something I did in person, a few weeks leading into this, I told them, I was like, hey, look, we're only getting about 80% of attendance in class. If you get these 80% of people to show up in orange on Halloween, you get X amount of extra credit. If you get your friends who are not showing up to this class to show up and also wear orange, you will get this amount of extra credit. And I had the most attendance, not everybody shown in here. We had something like almost 200 students. So almost everybody showed up on this day. And then on that day, I taught them all the hardest stuff that they needed to know for that class. So it worked out great. Some of the assessment tools I've used over the past few years, I started with Yuja video quizzes. Big thanks to the DTEI instructional designers to help me set that up. It worked really well for my asynchronous students pre-COVID. So I was teaching a few classes where a section of it was offered online completely asynchronously. and the majority of it was still offered in person. And for all my asynchronous students, it worked out really well because there were no supplemental videos, anything like that. They had to go through it. It worked great. Starting with the last year and a half, the user videos didn't work at all. I think it was mostly because students would rather watch the video recording of the live thing that was more recent, even though the content was the same. So they simply weren't using the old videos that I had recorded. I started with Poll Everywhere. I used that in person before they had Canvas integration and everything. It was great for quick feedback. And to get students on board with this, I first told them, I was like, hey, this is free, so you don't have to buy an iClicker for my class. So they were really happy about that. The second thing was the first few questions I asked were simply almost nothing about the class specifically, but just stuff about them. So the first thing I would ask as a poll would be simply, why did you choose the major you chose? And then we got everything from students who just wanted to build really crazy things when they graduated to some very simple answers like, I want money, it's a stable career. And I would have that display as a point cloud, just shown with all the text there. And I'd actually take a screenshot of that and I show it to them every few weeks so that when we do an exercise that nobody wants to do, I point back out. I was like, hey, this was what you wanted. You wanted to be able to build an autonomous robot that could go into space or whatever it was. I was like, this is a skill you need to help accomplish that. The only con of using things like Poll Everywhere and even the Zoom polls, which I moved to this last year and a half, is trying to have it count for participation. There's a little bit of overhead there, translating it back and forth between the different learning management systems. It was actually a lot easier when we had the old EEE setup. And for most assessments, I just use Canvas quizzes and assignments. Everyone participates. They know when things start. They know when things end. The only con I experienced using the quizzes and assignments was kind of just the initial setup time that it takes to create these at the beginning of the quarter and the flexibility. And what I mean by that is I like to do things on the fly in the middle of class. As I noticed from a poll or from student questions, there's certain things that they want to focus on. So we could just create an assignment in class right there. It was a little harder to do this using Canvas assignments. I figured a way around it, but it's just not as flexible as just doing things in person with whatever you need. So for the quizzes, one of the main concerns, both from students as well as other faculty members I was talking with, was, hey, if these things count for points, students are going to start cheating and all of this stuff. So what I started doing was I started building up my own little question bank for each of my classes. So this is just one example. So one of like 10 questions. It would pick 14 questions in here, and there's literally 100 questions or so inside there. So not only do you get to mix up the questions and mix up the answers, you can basically have an unlimited number of versions of these tests. So even if students are somehow communicating with each other, if it's an open book test, things like that, they may not even have the same questions. And the nice thing about engineering, and I'm sure all of your majors as well, is you change one little variable, one little number. The question looks the same, but it's totally different. So students don't even realize that till later, even if they were doing something dishonest. Rarely happens though in this class. They typically don't get the right answer. And the other nice thing for it is for practice quizzes, the ones I have at the end of videos, or I just link as small assignments. Students can take it over and over, and it's different questions each time. So they get to go back, review the material, test themselves, things like that. For me as an instructor, after they take these quizzes, what I like looking at is the quiz summary as well as individual stuff. And I can see which ones they did the best on, which ones they didn't, to kind of help me inform what I need to focus on in lecture or a follow-up assignment, things like that. And what I found that was really cool that I did not realize until actually this last year was that when I moderated a quiz, I could actually see how much time they spend per question. And this was really cool because now I could see which question individual students are struggling with. And I could see what they spent their most time on, what they didn't. And I'm actually working on a tool that will integrate with Canvas, hopefully eventually by next year, that that will give this as a summary so I can see this as an instructor for the whole class, and also to send it back to the student to let them know, hey, these were the topics you didn't do well on this quiz. You should check out these related modules. So it's really neat. It tells you exactly what they spend their time on and what they work on. And the things that I'm going to be implementing this coming academic year, just from my discussions with other colleagues in my department and other departments, is number one, grade scope. We had a lot of consistency issues when we had multiple TAs and graders in a large class. So this hopefully helps streamline all of the assignment completion and grading. I have been using Microsoft Whiteboard just as a presentation tool to show students what's going on. I really like using it because now I never run out of colors to use, unlike the in-person whiteboards that we have in class. What I am going to do that's new, that we've been using with our graduate students, we're now going to use it with our undergrad, is once they all sign up for an account, and pretty much everybody has a Microsoft or Gmail account anyway, we can have collaborative whiteboards where they can all write on the same screen. And that's what we're going to do for breakout rooms, group activities. And I'm hoping to be able to do it in my hybrid class with students who are both online as well as students who are there. And lastly, I'm going to be integrating Discord. So over the past few years, our students have always kind of created it on their own per class, and they just like chatting in there. And one of the things we've noticed, especially during this last year and a half on the Zoom sessions, is students get lost in their own conversation, and then they get lost in lecture. And what one of my other colleagues did is he actually just starts his own Discord, and then he has the TAs monitor it during lecture so that they can answer questions in there, since the students, for some reason, sometimes they really like to use the Zoom chat, sometimes they like to use their own little application like Discord. So the TAs will be monitoring that, and hopefully it's just an easier way for them to communicate synchronously with everything that we're doing. So with the stuff that I'm doing, graded quizzes tend to get more participation. I put a big asterisk there because it just depends on the student themselves. Some of them worked on things that weren't graded at all. Others needed some kind of incentive. Explaining to students the goals for each of these things that I was presenting to them, because there's literally like 100 assignments they have to complete during the quarter. I simply remind them of why they're putting in this extra work and what the difference an A student, a B student, and a C student would have to do. Because each of these quizzes, they have different levels you have to complete. And I simply tell them, okay, what is your goal? Because everybody's goal is different. If you simply want to pass this class, this is all you have to do. If you want to be able to land that internship at Northrop or at Boeing this summer, these are the things you typically have to do. And then from there, they get their own motivation on how much they complete. And of course, just use all the active learning techniques you learn in the ALI and workshops like this. And you can always get help from OIT and things like that as well. So yeah, and then just more pictures of me with students and making them take selfies with me. All right.
Wow, how fun. Wow, QB, thank you so much for sharing. Wow, yeah, I mean, just looking at it, I see you did a lot of different strategies and different tools. So, it's a lot of things. And then actually, in fact, I was writing out notes on quiz and analytics, that part, I didn't recognize that part, why you're doing this. I would love to learn that too. But so now, I mean, QB, when you went through more about Canvas quiz in terms of using a question banks, and I love that. And in fact, this is a perfect segue to asking actually both Nancy and Bridget, and I know both of you guys use Canvas quiz. And I know this is going to be a hot topic that a lot of faculty wants to know in terms of academic integrity. So now, I wanted to ask, since QB shared about his usage in terms of question banks, now I wanted to ask Bridget and Nancy. I know you both use a Canvas quiz. What did you do and how did you reinforce an academic integrity when you're using a Canvas quiz? Nancy, if you want to go first.
I grappled with using Respondus, and I ultimately decided not to use it just because I felt a little creepy spying on my students that way. And it's a little bit inequitable for students who may have like busy backgrounds, they have siblings, they have roommates, they can't find a quiet space to do their quizzes. So for academic integrity, I kept the quizzes short. So as I said, if they didn't know the answer, there wasn't a lot of time to Google or phone a friend. Using the big question banks, two people could sit next to each other and they would have completely different quizzes because the question banks are so big. And then also, as Q already mentioned, for quantitative questions, I use the random number generator. That also really helps. Also randomizing the order of the questions. When you put your questions into a group, it will randomly pull questions from that group. So the order is different for every student. And I think those were the main things that I did to try to enforce some academic integrity. I also put at the beginning of each quiz a note that said that by taking this quiz, you are agreeing to the rules of academic conduct. And if we find any errors or issues, they will be reported to the Academic Conduct Office.
Nice, nice. I like that. Having them to check off before they start quizzing. That's great. Time limits, question banks, and randomizing the questionnaire. How about Bridget?
Thanks. To me, there's really two different considerations. One is for the formative assessments, where actually I want them to go back to the material anyway. So what I want to avoid is finding a loophole, just clicking at random. And then if you have many trials, just eventually clicking on the right answer, but not learning anything. So it's avoiding loophole and making it just not worth it to try to cheat. And then there's obviously the summative assessments, and then you that have a bigger weight, and for those you want something else. So quickly on that part, one advantage of the Canvas quiz is that it lets you actually download the answers, and you get one big .csv file, like you can import in Excel. And then in Excel, you can use conditional formatting, so that if you find a wording, so that's especially for written answers, right? You find a wording that is just off, and you think you actually see it, you've seen it a few times. You can use conditional formatting, and it will highlight the cells, so the students who have given that answer. And then you can see, in particular, when that happens across several questions and you have students who light up like that, that's a very good way to actually know who's been cheating and to what extent. So that's something you can do with the Canvas quizzes. So otherwise, for the formative ones, I allow students to take the quiz twice, but they get the average of their score. So again, you want to discourage, I'm going to click at random, not spend a lot of time studying, and then I'll see what I get wrong and just check on those. So if you make it that they don't keep their higher score, but they keep their average score, then they're motivated to try hard from the get-go, but then you give them another chance to go back, check their learning, and do better. Again, I use also the fact that you can randomize the answer choices when they're multiple choice. I create question groups. One thing that's important is you don't want to just say pick 10 questions out of 100, but some are hard and some are easy. Students are going to know and they're not going to be happy, and it's not fair. So you can have different topics or different groups. So for a group for harder questions, and then you can say pick one hard question out of those 3 or 4 different hard questions. You also want to have questions that cover the whole breadth of the topic you're interested in. So if you create groups within your Canvas quiz, you can say, here are the questions that are all related to that particular subtopic. Pick 3 of those questions out of 10, for example. So that allows to have different questions for different students. Also, if they want to retake the quiz, they're going to get a different set of questions. Essentially, this is to foster their learning even more than just the plain cheating.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bridget. I like the way I see a lot of faculty using highest, but your motivation behind that to make it average, I was like, oh, that's right. But that's
Yes.
really good. One of the good strategies there. And again, actually, all of you kind of mentioned in terms of question banks. I love the way that you do need to, question bank is good, but do make sure to organize your question bank in terms of that it could be kind of group it in a way, the level of difficulties, not only the topic, but level of difficulty, so that it will be randomized and everybody will get an equal level of difficulty in the question. But that's great. I wanted to share this all because I know Canvas course is something that everybody has access to, and it's something that probably as QB shared, many people could access it, and probably most familiar with it. So I thought it would be a great way to start to kind of dig into a little more, especially in terms of the setting part. Thank you so much. So now I have a few questions about the Grayscope, and I know probably a lot of faculty is sharing Grayscope, have used Grayscope and not used Grayscope. What's Grayscope? And I know that specifically, like Creepy mentioned too, Bridge and Nancy, you mentioned it too. So just kind of bring it up in terms of open question. One, I would like to hear, and I did hear here, Grayscope is easy to manage grading, and it's very important, especially all of you have like 200 and above students are dealing with, you're doing it. So now I want to actually ask you, is there what feature and why did you choose Grayscope over Canvas assignment, which is kind of, you could see it could do very similar. And then how does it excel more than a Canvas assignment in terms of not only the students accessing it, but also as you as an instructor and your TAs grading them. So can you go a little more deeper when you're sharing that part? So now I could ask QB if you could share.
Oh yeah, so I haven't officially used Gradescope yet, just to let everybody know. But I know the two features I want from it based on my experience over the last few years. The first one is consistency in grading. We always have a rubric. I set out a rubric, but we have hundreds of students, right? So we find out, oh, after grading about 20, 30 students, oh, I should have graded it that way. I got to go back, reassign the points I assigned, things like that. Gradescope lets you do it really easily. You literally change one option and it fixes it for everything you've graded so far. The second thing that I really like, and it's actually that the TAs like, and they tried to sell me on Gradescope as well, is that now they can grade everything together and they don't have to hand off this huge stack of paper to somebody else. And yes, they do have to sit down and scan this, but the effort it takes to do that versus everything else, all the administrative stuff behind it, it's worth it. So that's where it streamlines really nicely. And for the student side, they can go back depending on what you want to show them because you have all this control, right? You can actually show them the rubric. You can let them see exactly what they missed. You don't have to leave all these extra comments in Canvas, especially with how I've been grading so far, which is we grade things on paper. We put it into my nice little Google Doc Excel thing because I have all these formulas. And then one of the worst things I hate about it is when I transfer the grades to Canvas, the grades transfer, the comments do not. So I had to sit there and copy and paste 300 comments every couple of weeks. It's not a big deal, but it takes time. So those are the nice things that I like about it.
Wow, thanks, QV. And TAs, hold on. they're trying to, yeah, that's great. Okay, how about Nancy?
Yeah, I have it up on my screen so I can show a sample assignment. This is from before COVID. This is from in-class exams. The students had to write their answers by hand. You scan it. Almost any university copier has a scanning function in it. So you just put it on the copier, you scan it. It takes about 10 minutes to scan a 400-person class. So that goes pretty fast. It recognizes handwriting. So it will recognize the student's name and ID number and automatically pair those. And it's really fast to pair it if the student wrote illegibly. And then the rubrics. So if I want to give this person a point, I just click on the number. So for TAs, it's great for speed grading. If I want to change the points, it will now recalculate the score for everyone. Adding things is really easy. You can create groups of rubric items. You can add things. So it's really easy to use. And for speed grading, it's been great. What convinced me to try Gradescope was it has its own, instead of using normal Scantrons, it has its own bubble sheet. And I have an example of that. So I can print this, give it to students, they put their name and ID on it. And again, Gradescope just automatically reads that when you scan it in, and it will automatically do the grading. Here's what it looks like. This is a screenshot, and they grade out all of the student ID numbers. It automatically assigns as many as possible. Like I said, it's really easy to match the name and ID number if something is a little bit illegible. It also has some pretty good analytics. So I can look at each item, see which ones were problematic. Did everyone pick the wrong answer? Statistics, if I want to add a tag to this, I can. And now if I want to go do some other analytics, I can pull up all the questions about the evolution of bugs. So if I'm doing some course assessment and even program assessment, people have found this to be really useful. So that was what convinced me to go to Gradescope, was these Scantron alternatives.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for showing that. I'd love to learn more about how you use it, more samples there. Please join Brick Arun with Nancy too. How about Bridget? How was your experience with Gradescope?
All right. So actually, I have used Gradescope also in that way, so with written exams. But Gradescope has a tool that is similar to the Canvas quiz. And here, maybe you can make that bigger. I have just shown in what, how they compare. So they have similar kinds of questions from written answers, numerical answers. Numerical, if you are in STEM, is great because students can write it in any format, like 0.1 or 0.1 or, well, actually that's 10% here. They can do it any which way, and the system will accept that. So that's really nice. So Gradescope, the online assessment tool, they're still working on it, but they don't have all the things we talked about earlier with Canvas, which is the ability to randomize the order of the answers, or to have selective questions, or to create different versions, which you can do in Canvas. The grading is much better. So as others have shown, you can actually give great feedback, whereas the Canvas speed grader is anything but speedy. Everything loads so slowly. You want to go from one student to the next, you have to wait. It's really awful when you have hundreds of students. The nice thing about those rubrics is that you can actually write full comments afterwards. So you can grade, and then you as the, or you can have your TAs or your readers grade, and you as an instructor at the end can go and write, fuller fledged explanations. You don't want big explanations as the TA's grade, because then the screen is filled with long explanations. So you can do that at the end. It's excellent also for checking on the quality of the grading, and that's especially important for big items like big exams. You want to see how your TAs or your readers have graded particular questions, and then if you think like, oh, this was graded a bit too harsh, you can again adjust the points after the fact, or you can just decide that something that was graded -1 point, you just make it into a warning -0 if you want later on. So that's that's nice. In terms of management, so if you're going to use in particular the online assignment in Gradescope throughout the quarter, every week, you know that if you have anything that is timed, you need to give more time for DSC students based on each one has their own different time limits. While in Gradescope, unlike Canvas, you can actually set at the beginning of the quarter the time extension for individual students, and then every time assignment is going to be given the extended time for those students. So you don't have to do that, unlike in Canvas, for every assessment you assign to everyone, and then you have to assign separately for different students to give them an extension. So that's very useful. Also, regrade requests. To my knowledge, there is only, students can post a comment on their assignment in the Canvas quiz. It's not particularly good. in Gradescope, this is really a great feature. So students write on the question for which they have an issue. They write, and they can write an explanation of why they think their question should be regraded. And so it's also tagged to the actual person who graded that question. Gradescope knows who physically graded, gave the points for that question, that student. And so in the regrade request section, the TA or the reader will see their name, and so they know they have to answer this, this, and that, and then they can check mark when they've replied. So that makes all the regrade requests so much easier. And if some student just writes, something like, please give me more points, that's not how it works. So I can actually copy that, and then also show a couple of, so how that, where is the chat? Oh, I'll put that in the chat later. So if you want to see this. All right, so I made, for example, I can show you a practice one that I made and also how it works. So that's the online assignment. So if you want to create an assignment, you could upload something like an exam that is paper-based, and you have to upload it, or you can have a homework where the students can upload either a file or a piece of paper that they photographed. But you can also make the online assignment. So that one is the one that is more similar to the Canvas. And so you have something like that. I have questions, you can name them. I find that in exams, I don't name them before the exam. I call them Q1, Q2, etc., the default. And then after the exam is done, I name them so that, between the grading team, we know which question we're talking about. That's a lot easier, especially if you make different versions. So you would edit the outline, and that is a process that is so much nicer than Canvas. Again, writing questions in Canvas is a bit of a nightmare because every question is within itself. You want to even, one answer is its own separate box. You need to click in and out of it. It's very time consuming. Every second you miss doing one line, it adds up. Also, the question banks are great, but like importing, trying to move questions is really clunky. In Gradescope, it's all copy paste. So I can make a new question, and I can just copy and just make it. And I show it as it happens right away. They don't have something when you can reorder them. So if you want to reorder, you have to copy and paste and delete again. So you can see, you see immediately as you type what things look like. You can add, you can have different kinds of questions. You can add images. You can have things where they are file uploads, so students will load their files. And when you grade them, you actually see the image, the upload within the question, much better than the canvassing. So if you have something where students have to do some analysis or upload things, that is much better. And again, also unlike the Canvas tool, in the Canvas tool, you don't necessarily see how it's going to look like to students unless you then at the end go back to student view, preview the whole thing. Whereas here, anything you do, you will see it immediately, right? So you want to put some, no. You will see immediately as you change how it looks like to the students. And you can add images. I added an image that says hello. Just you can see what it will look like to students. So that's very nice. And the nice thing also about that is everything that is something like a multiple choice question or a numerical question will be auto graded. And then all you have to do is then go and grade the text questions.
Wow, thanks, Bridget. QB just put it up the text. He's like, thank you so much. He also learned a lot of Gradescope, and I hope everybody here, and I'm learning too. Gradescope is pretty, it was used by some of the very specific faculty, but it got widely spread it out as of last year. So, but this is great. And thank you so much, Bridget, coming up with that two comparison. That's really good to see that. And as I experience the faculty on that. And thank you so much for everyone. So we have another question. Anne is asking, can students see the names of question in the Gradescope? Can anybody
Yes, so they see, if you want to name them, they're going to see that name. But again, you don't need to, or you can have a more generic name. So that's easier on big exams. If you have routine quizzes, and you don't want to change the names all the times, but the names aren't necessarily very important. I put generic Q1, Q2 names in the exams because Gradescope does not allow for a random ordering of the questions. So I don't want also students to say, oh, I have sometimes different, so I have different versions. But I don't want students to know, oh yeah, Q2, that's the same. I mean, to them, it means nothing. But if it's called, again, you know, like ladybugs on both exams, they'll know how to find it, right? But Q2 might be Q5 on some other exam. So the generic name means harder. They actually at least have to read the question. So before they can cheat. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I'm pretty sure a lot of you have a lot of questions, and we're going to save that for breakout room. I'm going to have one more question for all our panel. So if you could recommend or advise one thing, things to be mindful of for faculty to plan to make their course be more active or active and more active using this different assessment tools that you shared, what would that be? Let's start with Bridget, now QV, then Nancy.
More active means questions as they learn, and questions that are either not graded at all or mildly graded, or graded once they've started doing a bit more, their learning as consolidated. It's important to give them the opportunity to fail safely so that they don't just, first thing they do is find a loophole, find a way to get somebody else to give them the answer. And if you have in-person classes, so have questions and where they participate and they answer. And if it's videos, I add a ton of questions in my videos. They are not graded. I use H5P, but you can use also the Canvas, the UJA quiz. It's clunkier, but that works. But you don't have to grade that. You can have then, you know, a Canvas quiz or Gradescope quiz where you ask some of the same questions, but that makes them retrieve information. It's a different purpose. The first one is the active work as they learn is to process the information, make them remember things that are connected, makes them try to figure out what they're about to learn. And then you can have just formative questions to solidify, to get them to retrieve that information and solidify it. So that would be my suggestion.
Thanks, Bridget. How about QV?
I found my favorite thing to do, and I don't know if my students like it or not, but over the last year, we actually go back to some of these quizzes, whether they're multiple choice or short answer, and we'll actually redo the question. We redo it together. I'll be like, hey, look, A, B, C, D, the answer was C. So what do we have to change on the question so the answer is B? Or what do we have to do now if we change this thing in there? What would you put in the multiple choice? And I have them work on that. So then now it's something, whether they got it right or wrong, they have to think about it at a different level. And then now that also answers their next question, which they always ask me is, do you have more practice questions? I was like, I just showed you how to make practice questions. And there's less work for me too. Yeah.
That's great. That's one of the active learning strategies, you know, be the professor they come up with, and that's where they make you really think. All right, how about Nancy?
I like what Bridget said about giving students a chance to fail safely. So I have a lot of quizzes that they're short, they're not worth a lot of points. They can take it multiple times, and they're about the reading and the video quizzes and the videos. So students are really like those, and it gives them a lot of practice. I think one of the most important things for me, for students to not think of it as just busy work, is to make sure it's aligned with my learning outcomes. So if my learning outcome is be able to do an experiment with anteaters, I'll tell them this video is related to that. These quiz questions will help you prepare for designing that experiment. And then they say, oh, okay, we'll do the quizzes. We'll do a lot of quizzes if we know it's going to help us prepare for something.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Alignment is the one of the way, you know, the what we suggest also when you're coming up with your outcomes, and that's really good. Love that fact that students don't think that it's a busy work. It has a meaning to it, and it's going to help me to learn better. Thank you so much for everyone, and please let's give an applause to our panelists today. And thank you. So here I'm gonna share, and then I thought it was a very great way to kind of segue to share this thing. I know some of you mentioned and I love the fact I just kind of hearing again from Nancy, from Bridget, and also QB in the beginning in terms of, you know, having a room for students to fail safely. And actually, in fact, I would like to share one more faculty. Her name is Sherry Sagran. She was actually here. I actually think she's here too. She was one of our DLI faculty and have done using user video quiz and has so much success and got so many good feedback from students. And in fact, the way how she uses also to give a chance, a room for students to fail safely by creating a practice question using a user video quiz, and then the actual grading happened in the Canvas quiz. So there's a video there, and then she shares about some other things, pointers that she shared with us is she uses it as a practice quiz and really use that as a more like a reflective pause for them to even think about it and really help them to go deeper engagement, and then also to nudge student, hey, are you paying attention? so those user video quiz is actually a great way to utilize that, especially if you have a asynchronous video that you are providing. So please, if you already know, try that and try and see. If you don't know, then we'll be happy to help you out, kind of creating that and creating that environment with you. Kind of again share our digital active learning strategies, 12 strategies. There are a lot of things kind of we mentioned here and there, but everybody kind of share how they use in terms of assessing, in terms of active learning, in terms of how to really help students to meet that learning outcome. And these kind of digital active learning strategies are very, very essential in your teaching. And again, I would like to share with you, if you're not sure how to do so in the digital learning environment, here is some of the suggestions that we would like to share with you of that. And this one's also Megan shared with you in the beginning. We do have a website created that created for our faculty use and also for your student information.